Hands up, who has watched the BBC Panorama documentary about exposing private ADHD clinics? Hands up who has thoughts and feelings about that documentary. Me. Hi, my name's Emily, I'm 30 years old and I have ADHD. Before I go on, I do have an ADHD diagnosis and it's from a private clinic. So I'm talking from experience here. I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I do think that it's important to get a balanced view on things, and I thought I would just add a little bit of the other side of the picture. If you are one of my now 500 subscribers, welcome back. If you are new here, hello, so glad you found me. I hope that this video is helpful for you and perhaps allows you to think about some of the good and bad things about this documentary and voices maybe some of the thoughts and feelings that you are having yourself. If you are new here, please like and subscribe to my channel, it really helps me out, and also you can buy me a coffee if you really enjoy this video. I'll put the link just here. So last week the BBC released a documentary that was called Private ADHD Clinics Exposed. It is a Panorama programme, and Panorama is a very well respected and established documentary series that the BBC creates. It is sort of investigative journalism, and they take one key issue and do a deep delve into it, usually for half an hour or an hour. Panorama's been on the BBC for about 70 years and it is really, as I said, well respected and people trust it. And I think this is where my issue begins with the documentary. It's not so much that I think that the documentary is not saying some things that are true, it's that it's presenting a biased picture and it's not telling the whole story. When you have a platform that is so well respected and so widely consumed, it's really important that you do tell the whole story, and I just don't think that happened with the documentary. As I said, it doesn't mean that I don't necessarily agree with some of the parts of the documentary, but it's more how people are going to consume it that is the problem for me. The programme had a lot of sensationalist language in it. It used words like exposed and scandal, and both of those words are really almost like tabloid journalism, and I'm sorry, the BBC is better than that. The way the programme is formatted is that there is one journalist who is investigating the issue, and it focuses on his experiences having both an NHS appointment to see if he has ADHD and then a number of private diagnoses of ADHD, and how those two processes are different. I am going to say before we go on something that I've realised is my own personal bias, which was that it really annoyed me that I felt like the journalist was dressed in a way that he thought people with ADHD would dress. Like he was wearing like this kind of zany rainbow checkerboard check shirt, and he was wearing a little beanie hat, and he just had this like permanent like look of confusion on his face. And I'm not gonna lie, like I am confused a lot of the time, but I felt like he was presenting himself in a way that people would assume people with ADHD look like. And I did some Googling on the journalist and realised that he actually dresses like that all the time, and that's fine. Like I'm not criticising that look, like you do you look great, but that was my own personal bias, so I'm not perfect. So the documentary starts off with the journalist doing an online quiz to see if he has ADHD from a private clinic. So it's just a free quiz, you can go on and it just tells you whether or not you have some of the symptoms of ADHD. And he does this quiz and the result is that it says it is likely that you do have ADHD. And the way he reacts to this is very much like, well, that's telling me that I have ADHD. It's not, it's telling you that perhaps this is an explanation, and if you are interested or if these things are potentially causing you a lot of anxiety, grief, depression, you should pursue finding a little bit more about it. It's not an actual diagnosis. He then goes to a very established and well-respected doctor in the NHS who runs an ADHD clinic on the NHS, and they sit down and they have an appointment where they talk about whether or not the journalist has ADHD. They go through the entire diagnostic procedure. It takes about 3.5 hours, and eventually it comes out that he doesn't have ADHD and doesn't have any of the symptoms of ADHD. So 2 things on this. First of all, a lot of the doctors who work for private clinics are actually NHS doctors as well. The NHS in the UK is obviously the free healthcare system that we have and is state run, and the pay is not very good at all. We should really be paying doctors a lot more. So lots of NHS doctors do go and work at private clinics to subsidise that money that is coming in. They're incredibly highly trained professionals and they deserve to be reimbursed for their time, knowledge, expertise, etc. Therefore, if a doctor is making a diagnosis at a private clinic, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's done for the wrong reasons or that they don't have the experience to make that diagnosis. It's not like NHS good, private clinic bad, because there's actually a lot of crossover here. Secondly, there's a comment in the documentary where the journalist says that it can take up to 5 years to get a diagnosis from an NHS doctor. So yeah, the waiting times are really, really long, and that's not really acknowledged that much, and yet here he is skipping the queue. It just didn't really endear me to him very much that he got an ADHD assessment just for journalistic value. Makes me sad to think that somebody might have missed their appointment because he was there doing this instead. So in the next scene, the journalist leaves the hospital and he makes this comment, and I will read it. It is a quote. "We have spoken to dozens of patients and former employees, and they say almost everyone who goes to a private clinic ends up with a diagnosis of ADHD. Now, number one, I would like to see some hard data on that. So it's very easy to say almost everyone, but what is that? Is that 99% of people? Is that 90%? Is that 80%? 70%? It's very vague, and I like numbers and data to back up things, so that would be great. Thank you, BBC. Secondly, and this is a really important thing to remember with any kind of fact that you are presented like this, you need to take it in the context that it is created in. So if you are talking about a population of people who are going to a private clinic because they suspect that they might have ADHD, they are doing that because A, they are at a point where they are desperate for any kind of reassurance or diagnosis that there's not something wrong with them, and B, you're talking about people who are willing to put thousands of pounds into potentially getting a diagnosis. Those people are already predisposed to have ADHD. You're working with a population that are more likely to have ADHD because of the situation that they are in. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that a lot of people who go to ADHD clinics to get diagnosis actually get diagnoses. That is the way it works. We then move on to a big section of the programme, which is where the journalist goes and has diagnostic appointments with the private clinics that are mentioned. He mentions 3 by name, and I'm going to say here that I do have worries about these clinics. I do think that there are question marks around their practices and policies. It is worth saying that when you are in a situation as a society where there is a real demand for something and people are willing to give up money, lots of money, to acquire something, i.e. in this case an ADHD diagnosis, there are going to be people out there who are going to exploit that situation, and they're going to see an opportunity to make a quick buck. And that happens, and I have no doubt that that is happening within the private healthcare provider sphere, and that some of the clinics mentioned in this programme are a bit dodgy and are exploiting people. And I think that it is worth talking about. However, if that's all you talk about, it's going to mean that people who do have diagnoses from private clinics are going to begin to doubt themselves or feel doubted by others as a result, and that is not fair. A journalist goes and sees like 3 or 4 different private clinics and has a lot of bad experiences with them, and every single one he goes to, he has an online consultation and is then told that he has ADHD. The first one in particular I thought was terrible. At that clinic he did actually get prescribed Concerta XL, which is the medication that I take myself, and yes, it is a very powerful stimulant drug, and it worries me that he was prescribed it so easily. He literally had 40 minutes with a psychologist, so not even a psychiatrist. The difference being that a psychologist isn't actually a medical doctor, whereas a psychiatrist is and can make diagnoses and can prescribe medication, whereas a psychologist can't. At one point, the Zoom meeting actually cut out because they were using the free version, which you only get 40 minutes for, so I mean, that's just unprofessional and is something that clearly is going to set alarm bells ringing. The clips that showed the psychologist, it just made it like she looked like she didn't care at all. Like she looked like she just rolled out of bed. It was really awful, to be honest. So I would say if you have a bad feeling about something, it's probably for a reason. Yeah, that first clinic, like, not good. In another diagnostic appointment with a different clinic, he is actually seen by a pharmacist. Again, not a medical doctor. Pharmacists know a lot about drugs and their application and the way they interact with other drugs, etc., etc., but they cannot diagnose you with something, so that was really concerning as well. So obviously there's something dodgy going on there with these clinics. What I can say from my personal experience is my diagnosis was a very thorough, very long-winded process. A lot of information was taken about my medical history, my mental health background. There were questions around my childhood. My parents were approached to give information. My partner was approached to give information. I had to do a number of assessments online that were things like differential diagnoses to see if I had autism or ADHD or both. There were things where I had to talk about the medication that I was currently on. And when I was diagnosed, I then had to do a lot of physical assessments to make sure that my body was happy and healthy enough to actually take the very powerful stimulants that I was being prescribed. I had to go and do like a medical health check. I got weighed, I got measured, I got my ECG done, I had a blood test, all of that. And that was with a private online clinic. So there are legit ones out there. And that was something that really bothered me about the documentary, and I think this is at the core of how I feel about it, and that is that people are going to watch this and they are going to think that anyone who has a diagnosis of ADHD that wasn't given out by the NHS is not legit. And it's also going to leave people who do have online private diagnoses of ADHD, like myself, potentially feeling confused and feeling like they might have been conned and feeling like they are lying to themselves and or to other people. Yeah, I found that upsetting. I found that upsetting to think of so many people like myself in that situation, because the documentary didn't talk about the fact that there are a lot of people out there who have had diagnosis of ADHD who do have it. Myself included. I definitely have ADHD and the medication has changed my life. I want to reassure people that if you are someone like me, the way you feel and the situation that you find yourself in are important and valid and worth talking about. And I think as a community it's really important that we voice these things, because unfortunately the BBC is very well respected and is going to push this agenda, and I worry about the damage that that could do if it goes unchecked. The journalist does acknowledge that a lot of people who seek ADHD diagnosis have very complex mental health backgrounds, and just because they are seeking a private diagnosis doesn't mean that they don't have ADHD, but this is very much a kind of afterthought. And because the programme is only half an hour long, it really doesn't give an opportunity for anyone from the other side to voice their opinions, thoughts or experiences. There is one girl in the programme who does have ADHD, one person, and my heart goes out to her because she was conned, and I have so much sympathy for her because she was obviously in a situation where she was really desperate for support and she wasn't getting that. However, if you're making a programme about this, it's probably worth speaking to some of the people involved a little bit more. I know for a fact that the ADHD Foundation have published a response to the programme, which I will link here, and that is really insightful and useful to read as well, so go and have a look at that, because I think it kind of explains much better some of the things I've been talking about. So in conclusion, my key points are: 1, there are terrible people in the world who will con you given the opportunity. You need to be careful, you need to do your research, and you need to make sure that the diagnosis that you are seeking is coming from a place that is legit. Unfortunately, these places do exist. 2, if you have got a private diagnosis from an online clinic, that doesn't mean that it is not legitimate. I really advise you to reassure people, if you have had a positive experience with one of these clinics, to talk about it. And 3, something that I haven't mentioned yet but is really important, at no point did this documentary mention that most people are seeking private diagnoses because the NHS cannot cope, and this is due mainly to underfunding. Ultimately, it's the government's fault. They really need more money, and if they had more money, they would be able to provide a much better, more efficient service to people who are seeking these diagnoses, people who are really in need of help and support and guidance. At the end of the programme, there is a nurse, a mental health nurse, who says, this is the quote, "People are being let down big time." And he's talking about the private clinics there. And I'm sorry, it's not the private clinics who are letting people down. That quote should be about the government and the fact that they aren't funding the NHS properly. They're the ones letting people down. I'm going to get off my soapbox now and stop talking. I really hope that this video has kind of explained some points that you might have been feeling or thinking. Please let's get some chat going in the comments section. You don't necessarily have to agree with my opinions. I am fully aware that it's just one person, and if you have other opinions, it'd be great to hear them. In the meantime, please look after yourselves. As I said, buy me a coffee if you enjoyed this video, and it would be great for you to like and subscribe. I hope to see you back here soon. Have a wonderful day. Bye!